All right. Welcome, everybody, to the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the Chief Content Officer at GTM Delta and the host of the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. Super excited because today I'm welcoming Rick Kutcipal, who is somebody who we've been talking about a lot of the work that has been happening in the industry around innovation. And we've got work that's happening with the STA community. We've got stuff that there's collaboration around the work that's happening within SNIA as well. Great opportunity to have a great discussion. But before I get too far, for folks that are brand new to you, Rick, if you want to do a quick bio and introduction, and then we're going to jump in.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. So my name is Rick Kutcipal. I'm a product planner within Broadcom's Data Center Solutions Group, and I'm also a member of the board of directors of the SCSI Trade Association.
Now, it's always fun because I'm seeing more and more where when we started, this is the SNIA, podcast, we talk with people from, IEEE, with the SCSI Trade Association, with many of the other standards bodies and communities. But folks may not know the difference or what the origins are. If you want to talk about STA and I know we mentioned T10 as well in some of the chat we had prior to this. Let's unpack the acronyms for folks, Rick, and then we'll talk about what's going on.
Right. So I guess let me start with STA. We're the SCSI Trade Association, so we're part of SNIA, and we consider us the marketing arm for T10. T10 is an INCITS organization, and that's where the real technical work gets done. They develop the specs, and then STA helps guide some of that, and then promotes it within the industry. And it's not just SAS, really. It's really all things SCSI. But we are branded as the SCSI Trade Association.
When it's interesting because everybody nowadays, when we talk about what's coming and what's new and the exciting industry trends, the first thing everybody does, of course, their AI starts dripping off their tongues, and it's all about all these new, fantastic, amazing things that we think we're doing, but we're actually not necessarily doing at the level we think. I think there's an over-rotation to these really far-reaching, stuff that's happening today, and it's interesting use cases, but we forget that there's still a ton of innovation that's going on in tried and true technologies that have been around for a while. So how does this come in when we say SAS has got something new? People may be going, really? So what is going on in the STA community?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The SAS spec has gotten to 24 gig. Everybody's aware of the 24 gig revision of the spec. But what people don't understand is that the SCSI stack itself is very layered, and the very bottom of that would be in this case would be the SAS4, the physical layer, and on top of that there are many different areas, and that's where the innovation is coming to support features focused on the needs of the hyperscalers, with capacity and rotational media, as well as the performance needs of flash.
And it's funny because we think of the scale at which we're working with, and quite often that's where people think is everything is going to be sort of bigger, better, faster, more. But it's also about consistent programmability. It's about consistent APIs. It's about new ways to do management. A lot of the work that happens in the SNIA community around stuff with swordfish relating to what's going on with redfish. So it's not just day-to-day operations of the metal, but how do we manage, optimize, protect? So when we have work that's going on in the technical working groups and within STA, what are some of those, sort of features and factors that are being managed and innovated on?
Well, so first let me talk about, the legacy of SAS and of SCSI, right? SCSI's been around for a very long time. SAS since, the beginning of the decade, of the century, actually. And it's a very tried and true platform. Very reliable. It's been enterprise tested and true. So when it comes to reliability, manageability, serviceability, a lot of that is actually built into the specification. Moving forward, right? The real innovation that's occurring now, comes in, a couple different areas. Like I mentioned, one is focusing on the needs of the CSPs or the hyperscalers, with their insatiable requirements for capacity, and performance. And we'll talk about it in a minute. It's performance isn't just fast data, fast reads and writes. It can get into latency and other metrics, right? And then on the, with regard to flash, right, the incredible read capabilities of flash, and how SAS is dealing with that, and there have been some innovations around that area as well.
Well, and even just, there's so many things that we take for granted that are, when I'm an older fella, so when I came into, computing in the enterprise, there were very low capacity drives, even just the idea of having different RAID patterns. It was sort of new. Like, what was the reason why you would use RAID 0 versus RAID 1 versus RAID 5? And then RAID 6 was just coming, and it was like, we were sort of wrapped around the axle on how and when to use this stuff, because the use cases weren't really varied. But what we're seeing now is like the pattern of workloads is so fundamentally different than it was when I was coming through the industry in the enterprise days. So what does this mean now, for SAS as an architecture with these really diverse and like high scale workloads?
So good question. One example is, the service level agreements that the hyperscalers have, right? So these big data centers will have very specific service agreements that they have, with their customers, and so certain metrics need to be met. And in order, and one thing that T10 has done is they've implemented what they call command duration limits. And this is to help with the tail latencies of the drives, of the HDDs, of these very, very large HDDs, right? So for the most part, the average latencies of an HDD are very predictable, very, very, very on average, very predictable. But in some cases, the drive could be doing, some garbage collection, doing another task, or have to do a couple seeks, and then what they call the tail latency becomes very large. And so T10 has implemented CDLs, or command duration limits, in order to handle this. And what it does is it gracefully fails a particular command if that latency gets too long. And there are configurable policies that are in place, and so the user, or the CSP can put those in place to be able to throttle or control that. And this originated from an OCP effort called OCP Fast Fail. And there's actually a good publication, it's called Cloud HDD Fast Fail Read. It was published in 2018. And that was really the genesis of, then T10 took it, and it was the genesis of CDLs, which was published in SPC 6, and starting to be deployed in today's data centers, specifically to control the tail latencies of drives. And there's quite a bit of information online if you go and search.
Yeah, and it was interestingly this morning, I was literally listening to somebody talking about SQLite and sort of one of the challenges around rewriting it in Rust. And one of the things that they were struggling with was this idea of like partial writes and handling partial writes because of tail latency in those IO queues. And it's so apropos that here we are, realizing this is being solved at a few different layers, but at the very bottom layer, like the safest down to the metal layer that people need to worry about or be confident in, I guess, is what's been going on and seeing those innovations in SAS.
Yeah. And another one, is about just servicing the capacity needs of
Yeah.
the hyperscalers, right? And so everybody's probably familiar with, or at least heard of, SMR, or shingled magnetic recording. In fact, over 50% of the enterprise rotational bits shipped in 2024 have been SMR SMR
Wow.
enabled, right? So that's pretty big. So SMR has become very large, and just in general, in order to improve the aerial densities of the drives, right, to get more capacity in the same footprint. And so T10, we have this all the way back, and it's in ZBC1, and it's been published for now, I don't know, maybe 8 or so years. So it's well established. The follow on to that is what T10 calls format with presets. It's a very obscure name. A lot of times it'll be referred to as hybrid SMR, or next generation SMR. And what it does is it gives the user, or the CSP, the ability to format the drive either as a CMR drive or an SMR drive, or even dynamically do it. So part of the drive is CMR and part is SMR.
Wow.
And it's mainly being used today as a skew reduction. So the hyperscaler, the CSP, can buy a specific drive, and then depending on the actual need, do they need CMR, do they need SMR, do they need more capacity, but then be limited to sequential operations, or or do they need CMR drives? And so it's a very interesting one, and that's being rolled out today as we speak as well.
What you think about, like, one of the things I've talking to the hyperscalers myself, like the biggest challenge is capacity planning and management, because of really they don't know what workloads are coming. So there's a lot of like thumb in the air, guessing the wind direction stuff. But giving this flexibility now means that diverse workload patterns can apply to the same gear. And then now we can get the advantages at the lowest layer that ultimately ends up as being better SLAs, better performance profiles,
Right.
and most likely as well durability, right? Because that means the longevity of the hardware is going to be ultimately stretching out the cost, and there's wins all around, I would say.
Right. No, agreed.
Now, one thing I was curious, sustainability is coming up more and more, and I've been lucky. I've chatted with John Michael Hands, who's been on a couple times on the podcast, and we've talked a lot about the sort of secondary factor. We don't necessarily say, hey, the stuff you just mentioned is like, it actually does have a real strong sustainability angle, but not as a primary purpose. It's sort of a bonus fries to it. But this is the advantage that, like, you get a piece of hardware and it could do one thing, and that was it. But now this is adding more flexibility. And I would say then the environmental impact is probably much better, because we're likely driving better power utilization, and we can more optimize the use of those large cap drives, so that we can, again, stretch the need of the workload as far as possible without having to put more impact on the power, air conditioning, and just the actual gear itself.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I haven't really thought of it in that context, but that is I would call it a secondary value proposition of this type of technology.
And then, as the classic goes, everything sounds great when it's going great until it's not. So stuff like RAID rebuild assist and other things around the recovery and the recouping that. Let's take us through, what does this mean for, developments happening in that area?
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, there's been innovation on numerous fronts, and we just touched on some of the more HDD hyperscale centric ones, but also with regard to the innovations in just in performance with with flash, especially the read capabilities of flash. One problem that keeps getting discussed is rebuild times. the drives are getting so big, and rebuilds are pretty, compute intensive process, right? And not only does it take a long time and have the vulnerability of having one drive out of your array, but also then the performance of the system is typically impacted. And so what T10 has done is they've implemented what they call rebuild assist, and this gives the drive the ability to communicate via SAS, to the rate engine, and about the health of the LBAs, specifically marking the failed LBAs, so that when it comes to a rebuild, right, the rate engine can use that information and only then recreate, because recreating the data is one of the big, is one of the big ticket items. And if they only have to rebuild the specific things that are bad instead of everything, the rebuild process can be much more efficient. So that's one that's rolling out today as well. And another. Oh, go ahead.
So I was going to say, and it, it's funny talking about sort of percentage of utilization, not that we're like sort of looking at market specs and market, implementations, but again, we kind of over rotate to the new, exciting, shiny stuff. I would say, but like, what is the percentage of SAS, storage that's sitting out in these hyperscalers today? Is probably the significant portion of a lot of their data layer.
So, what I haven't seen the most recent data, but at the beginning of this year, a report that I saw was estimating, about 10% of the capacity, the total capacities in these data centers, is not SAS related, is not on a SAS infrastructure. So 90% is behind the SAS infrastructure. So remember that that's not only SAS, SAS drives, because the SAS drives may not make up, that surely doesn't make up that much, but then all the ATA drives, right, sit behind a SAS infrastructure, and that's part of the SAS spec, is the SAT layer, and they translate between SCSI and ATA, and so all those ATA drives, all those nearline high cap drives are all part of the SCSI infrastructure.
As they say, my favorite line's always, you call it legacy, I call it production. All this time we talk about the past, but like the past is actually pretty happily working in the present, and it has a long future ahead.
And the AI is the buzzword, right? Everybody's eyes are spinning with AI, and it is a very important technology and a very important transition within the ecosystem. But remember, it takes a lot of data to drive these models. And while SAS may not be like at the heart of the AI machine, right, it's very important in containing all this data that then go to create these models.
Well, and I would say this is where we will begin to see, in fact, we're already starting to see this, and I always mispronounce it, whether it's Jevons or Jevons paradox, the idea that we make something so efficient that it becomes popular, and that it rises in utilization, but the idea that we think it's just going to be like stable and age out, but in fact, it becomes this new spot. And we're seeing a lot of, the hope, at least at the hyperscaler level, that they can use things like S3, for storing training data. And then we begin to see the work of stuff like CXL and SDXI. But at the underlay, what is the thing that we're still doing? The artifacts are still there at these hardware layers, and we're getting optimizations in how we manage the way that, like you said, just the fact that RAID rebuild assist, knowing that you can be aware of what the performance impact is of stuff and potentially, run production workloads alongside these things where we're very laser specific on what the rebuilds are versus before. Like at these scales, it would be impossible to manage data centers if we didn't have the innovation that's gone on in that SAS layer.
Agreed. And it's been around for a very long time, and it will be around for a very long time.
So looking ahead, Rick, what's the kind of next things that we're going to see coming through on the STA community, and in fact, what do you see as some of the other collaborations, even at the human layer, that you're seeing with other folks like yourself that are, making plans for what's ahead?
Yeah. So again, like I said, there's still room for a lot of innovation on top of the current physical layer, and there's a lot of work being done in T10. T10's working vigorously on a number of these things, and there are a bunch, and so a lot. These specs take time to come out, and to get done correctly. So some of the things we've been talking about, are complete. Some are still being worked on, but some of the things we're looking at in the future, security is a big topic, right? And so, is there anything SAS can do in terms of security? Some ideas around key per IO, right? So having a key for every piece of data going across. That's one that that's something that's being tossed around. Attestation, support of attestation, is another
Right.
one. To be able to be, SAS being the infrastructure that then all the media is sitting, all the media that we've been talking about, is sitting behind. It's a good place for that type of thing. So there are a number of things that that are being looked at. And I picked on security because security is a hot topic these days, and so
As it should be.
yeah, right, yep.
Well, I always, sort of laugh because we had, at one point somebody talked about there's DevOps was, again, it was the hot new thing. Now that it was really a new thing, it'd been around since RAD, development. We just renamed it. We called it DevOps. And then all of a sudden you have this idea of DevOps where we called it DevSecOps, and people got a little irked because they're like, why do you have to say DevSecOps? Like it's implied. I said, whoa, no. It was hoped. It was not implied. It was like no one did actually invite the security team. And that's another thing with what's going on with the SCSI Trade Association and inside SNIA. You're surrounded by people that are cross group. So you have security pros. You've got the CSPs, MSPs, and the hyperscalers that are participating. You've got individual hardware vendors. You've got memory vendors, GPU vendors. Everybody's in this room. And whereas we used to kind of go away and develop our own individual pieces and our pillars, and then they would come together at the end with maybe APIs or SDKs if you're lucky. Well, now you're literally having conversations with these security people, so that, as you say, the idea of like doing key generation and dynamic, key per IO, that's very much a thing that requires both sides of that conversation to be present.
And that's something that really stuck out with our our integration into SNIA. Something that I guess I didn't appreciate is that community around us, to give us access to the experts in all these different fields, right? That's something that I that I think a lot of us didn't really foresee. But it's very beneficial to us, and we are using SNIA, the infrastructure of SNIA in that case.
Well, there's definitely a lot of excitement ahead, and like I said, for anybody that thinks SAS is settled science, this is not the case. And there's still innovations with LTO. There's still innovations in all these other different storage layers. As much as I'd like to say that tape is dead, SAS isn't dead. It just smells funny. That was it's a Frank Zappa line of jazz, but there is so much cool stuff that's ahead. And so I'm excited. And first of all, Rick, thank you very much for taking the time to share today. And for folks that do want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can get together with you and talk with the folks on the STA community and get connected with T10 as well?
Yeah, it's via. So I think the best way is via the SCSI Trade Association, via SNIA, and I believe we'll put that the link to our website, at which contains our roadmap. and you can see some of those innovations. We'll include that link in the proceedings of the podcast.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And actually, that was a really good point. We want to make sure that folks do check it out, because being able to see those roadmaps gives you a sense of what's coming, and also where they see the opportunity to collaborate. Because quite often, people, they think that they're heading towards some uncharted territory, and you find out that there's a bunch of people already waiting for you at the bottom of the hill. You're like, okay, maybe we can save a lot of time. And I think that's the innovation pace that happens in these communities is so much greater in a quiet way, because of the work that's happening across companies who are technically competitors in the field. And yet this is a safe innovation collaboration space where we can meet amazing humans and learn about amazing technology capabilities. So
agreed.
I'm a fan. Well, Rick, thank you so much. And happy New Year, I guess, is about the time this is rolling out. People may be hopefully spending New Year's with a glass of a bubbly in their hand and a SNIA podcast on their iPod while they're listening. No better way to start your year than with great conversations like this. So, Rick, thank you very much. And for folks, of course, do check out this and other great conversations on the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. We've got the audio version, and this is also going up on YouTube, so we can see these beautiful smiles happening. And thank you very much for taking the time with us today, Rick.
Thank you, Eric.